All right, so this is going to serve as the study guide for this next Unit 3 exam. And this exam covers a lot of bases. I think I had mentioned one of the sessions that, this is the bioenergetics, it's adaptation, endocrinology, and but they're all kind of tied into the same aspect, and it's all about intensity and basically the principles. If you use it, you're going to get better at it. And if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And bioenergetics, I think, is the most meaningful, but it could also distract you in terms of what to study, because there's a lot of, not a lot of erroneous, but a lot of stuff that we don't really need to know, like the particular components of ATP and the adenosine and ribose. And there's a lot of biochemistry. There's a lot of these images of the Krebs cycle and all these steps. And I remember when I took an exercise science class in my undergraduate, that we had to know like the whole Krebs cycle and all the stuff processes. And I know in anatomy or biology, you have to kind of know like the phosphate electron transport chain. And when I took a graduate level course, I had a faculty member that said, you don't need to know that shit. You can look it up, right? And so as long as you're studying certain things, like like different research aspect, but in the end, as long as you kind of know what the outcome is, like in this particular aspect, it's looking at the metabolism of glucose. So you have glycogen, and with all these steps here, the most important aspect is understanding that glucose through fast glycolysis is the byproduct of lactate. So I think I emphasized the things that needed to be emphasized in the videos through the chapter. What I would do if I was studying this particular unit is I would appreciate that the different, let's see if they have it, the different substrates that are used in the different systems. So if you're looking at the phosphagen system, understanding and appreciating that it's the fastest yielding energy system, but it's the lowest yielding. It uses creatine phosphate as its substrate, and it's used in the first, like the intensity level of exercises that you can do for only about 8 to 10 seconds, right? And then the glycolytic system is the system that uses sugar, and that's activities that you can do for about 2 minutes or so. And then the lactate, you have fast and slow glycolysis, so the lactate production and the lactate accumulation. And then you have the oxidative system with the with the sugar and the fat oxidation. So, just kind of being able to work through those systems and understanding which exercise events would be which energy system dominant. I think this textbook, no, it doesn't. This one does. In my lecture, in my video, I kind of posted some events. So like if you think about an athlete that is doing a 100-meter sprint, like which energy systems do you think they would be involved in? And so that's like an activity that lasts about 20 seconds, which clearly uses the phosphagen system, but it lasts too long. So the phosphagen system, let's say you're doing a 100-meter event might be just phosphagen, but it also might tap into the glycolytic system as well, unless you're Usain Bolt, who is 9 seconds and you're done, right? But it's that type of event. Thinking of like a 400-meter event, 400-meter event would be glycolytic system, right? That's under 2 minutes. It's purely glycolytic. It's you use the phosphagen and then glycolytic, and then like a mile run is going to get into your oxidative system because it's activity that's lasting longer than 2 minutes. So being able to work through the energy systems and apply them that way, that's where the bulk of this is going to be. And then understanding, let me go back to Blackboard here real quick. Understanding this image and able to work through this and understanding the intensity dependency, and that intensity is what drives the energy system. It's intensity that drives it drives, the hormonal response. And so everything circles back to intensity. So very, very high intensity, moderate intensity, and low intensity way down here. And then just, kind of looking at, I'm mostly burning fat for fuel, as long as sugar the blood sugar levels aren't elevated. So that's it for that particular chapter. And then the EPOC, right? This exercise post-oxygen consumption, understanding that the aerobic versus anaerobic, that you're going to have a longer recovery. Like think about anaerobic as borrowing debt against the oxygen that you've created. and that you're going to have to pay back that debt at some point, and that happens after exercise. So sometimes your metabolic output is going to be elevated even after exercise has stopped because you're paying off this debt that was accrued during the anaerobic phase. And then also things like anaerobic and aerobic coexist, so they're not complementary but supplementary. So the aerobic system you're always in, you're never out of the aerobic system. The only one that you're in and out of is the anaerobic system, and you're never in the anaerobic system by itself. You're either your state. Let's go back to this image. Your state is either 100% aerobic or aerobic and supplemented by the anaerobic system. So hopefully that's clear. I think I said it multiple times through the videos and in some of our live sessions that you're never in the anaerobic state by itself. You're always breathing, always required oxygen. So the oxidative system is always working. It's never at zero. But the glycolytic, the phosphagen system will get down to zero. Your ATP will get down to zero. And your glycolytic system will always keep a pilot light burning even way out here in low intensity activity. So just as long as that's clear for that. And then we switched the textbook. We went to chapter 4, which I provided for you guys in the module, which is the endocrine system. And for the endocrine system, just kind of appreciating that there are chemical messengers, but really understanding the hormonal response, that it's not just a total hormone, that the receptor and the receptor availability or sensitivity is also a key factor. And so we look at trying to maximize these hormonal responses. You want to do things that maybe not necessarily increase hormone production, but maintain or increase hormone sensitivity. So turning on androgen receptors for testosterone, keeping insulin receptors sensitive from that, and just appreciating those components. Knowing the difference between a peptide-based and a steroid hormone, right, fat-based, and understanding the dynamics for that, the receptor sensitivity on the outside versus the inside of the cell. And then kind of knowing which hormones are anabolic, which ones you want to maximize and optimize for men versus women, which ones are catabolic to adipose tissue and lean body mass, and kind of playing off that dynamic. That's really the takeaway for this is. And then the big one is, which is not depicted here, but was in the images. It was let me so kind of looking at this image here, where we look at the immediate hormonal responses. And so when we look at like a 3-day or a 4-day period, you can see that there's a ebb and a flow, a high and a low for the hormones. And when we look at our energy systems and we look at the intensity activity and how intensity drives energy systems, intensity also drives the hormonal responses. And when we look at this graph here, we see the two primary hormones that are available, that are trying to make substrate available to the tissues so that they can provide ATP. So when you're here, it's all about using oxygen as much as you can. And the end result of the energy system is to take substrate, because you can't store ATP, and you're taking carbohydrate, fat, or in some cases protein, which is stored energy that your body is using to recycle ADP into ATP so that the cells can do their job. And so when you look here, your body needs to take that stored tissue, the stored substrate in those tissues, so fatty acids in adipose tissue, and the glycogen that's stored in muscle and glycogen stored in liver, and that needs to be released and then sent out to the working tissues. And so the hormones and the hormonal response, that's the message, or that's what drives that cell opening up and saying, fine, fatty acids are going to come out, or fine, sugars are going to come out, or yes, we're going to start breaking down amino acids. And so the two primary hormones that do that, outside of the catecholamines, the adrenaline that we talked about before, but here is the growth hormone and cortisol. And those are your two primary hormones that are there to make sure that you have as much blood sugar as possible and that fatty acids are readily available, so that fats are breaking down. So adipose tissue, like those, we looked at adipose, the adipocytes, the fat cells, they're opening up to allow fatty acids to go into the bloodstream, to be sent to the liver, to either be produced into ketones or to be metabolized by the working tissue directly. So when you look at your initial stress response, you see that growth hormone is the primary hormone that's coming out, and it peaks about 20 to 30 minutes into the exercise. And this is driven by high intensity exercise. So you just getting up and going for a walk or doing a little jog, you're probably not going to get a large enough growth hormone response. The stress, the threat isn't high enough for you to do that. Your body can probably do that on its own, a little bit of adrenaline and a little bit of the cortisol. But during really high intensity activities like a full on sprint or a heavy set of deadlift or bench press, whatever you're doing, that's going to be a big enough threshold or stimulus that's going to say, hey, we're in an alarm state. These two are working in conjunction, and they're both released at the same time. So you can see on the onset of exercise, cortisol is released and growth hormone is released. They're just released at different rates. The growth hormone is more of a linear trajectory, so it shoots out right away, and then as fast as it rises, it falls pretty quickly. You can see that cortisol has more of an exponential, where it's a slow progress, and then it rapidly starts to become more logarithmic or exponential. And when you look at the different types of training that you could do, are you working out in the gym for about 60 minutes, 90 minutes, or 15, 20 minutes? This has different hormonal outputs on your exercise. So that's why it doesn't really matter how many calories you burn during your exercise. What I'm more interested is in how did you do those calories in the first 10 minutes, or did it take you an hour to burn those amount of calories? That is going to show you the different intensity or the different energy system that you were in trying to provide substrate. And so when you can work out way out here in this glycolytic, like fast glycolysis or the phosphagen systems, you're going to emphasize more your growth hormone response. And the key now is, if your goal is fat loss, your key is to stop exercise right about there. Right? If you can time it perfectly, where you're ending here, and it kind of shows you here too, where your ideal time is right at that peak, what you're doing is you're going to ride out that growth hormone wave without really getting that cortisol response to go higher. And I think I had mentioned in the videos that this was the science behind, or the thought process behind CrossFit and the high intensity interval training. And you're doing a lot of work and you're shoving it into a short period of time, so that after 20 minutes, you're spent, right? You're done. And lo and behold, you're ending right about there where growth hormone is peaking. So this is not total time in the gym. This is total time of high intensity activity. So let's say you get to the gym, you do your warm up, some mobility training, some intervention, some stretching, whatever you're doing. That might take you 10, 15, 20 minutes. Then you start your high intensity training. So you're there really for 40 minutes, but it's really just looking at the amount of time that you are in the high intensity realm. Okay. Long workouts aren't bad. So being exposed to cortisol isn't necessarily a bad thing, but cortisol is antithetical to testosterone, right? So if testosterone builds up lean body mass, what cortisol is doing, I think I've said that protein isn't a normal substrate for ATP production, but it can be used in long duration aspect. What's driving that is usually the cortisol. So you can see that cortisol usually comes out like peaking or kind of plateauing at about 2 hours to 120 minutes. So it's usually when you're doing long duration activity that you start to break down a lot of muscle tissue. So a cortisol response in this range isn't so bad, but it's one of those things too that you're, if you're using muscle, when you first start training and you start working out, cortisol is going to be pretty disastrous to lean body mass comparatively to when you've been training for a year or two. Cortisol doesn't have that big of effect on protein unless you're doing long duration activity. So you get like a down regulation of receptors so that the body kind of protects the lean body mass and forces the body to use more of the fat tissue or the stored muscle glycogen. So it's an adaptive process. But if you're an athlete and you're not really worried about lean body mass, you might need those 90-minute training sessions, particularly if you're a bodybuilder, right? The high volume training. There's no way you can do bodybuilding. Works more on volume than intensity. Like intensity is irrelevant when it comes to bodybuilding. Like they don't really care if they're strong or what. They just want to have the volume response of the muscles grow. Whereas you're more athletes like with Tommy here being powerlifting, your workouts are probably going to be, just because the amount of rest that you need in between, you're not really maintaining a high intensity for 60, 70 minutes. You're working out and then you're taking at least 3 to 5 minutes, hopefully in between sets, to allow full recovery of the nervous system and the creatine phosphate system. So it's not like you're doing deadlift and going right to bench press and then right to squat. And then, it's more spread out. So this is more continuous high intensity activity and not more the intermittent. But nonetheless, you still want to consider when you're designing programs for your clients, is their goal mostly fat loss? Well, you might want to hit it hard, get in, get out, and get out of there. Is there more size and bulk? Well, then maybe here, but I would still argue that the shorter, sweeter exercise, more intense, it's probably going to be more superior if their tissues can handle it, right? Higher intensity means higher tissue load. Higher tissue load means more susceptibility to breakdown or injury. Any questions on this? This makes sense? And this kind of just looks at the 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, which is kind of more consistent with the next chapter, which is the adaptations. So that would be it for the hormonal aspect for the endocrine system. And then you get into the adaptations, and the adaptations really can be summed up in 2 images. This one here, the general adaptation syndrome, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. And then the one slide that had the untrained, aerobically trained, and anaerobically trained to kind of show the muscular adaptation. Let me pull that guy up. So looking at this slide here, so the general adaptation syndrome, and then understanding the changes that are actually going to occur, right? That you're going to get more powerful and stronger with anaerobic type training, and you're going to probably get maybe a little weaker with anaerobic training or aerobic training because of the loss of muscle tissue that's happening, right? The type 2 converting to type 1, which don't really lend themselves to that. Understanding the difference between, this will be on the test, and understanding the density aspect, where you have this confusion that it looks like you're losing capillaries or losing mitochondria, right? Here's your sedentary individual, and it appears that when you start doing resistance training that you actually lose mitochondria or you lose capillaries, right? You go from 3 to 2 or from 2 to 1, or you're just kind of looking at that. But what's happening, and the reason this is, you're not actually losing capillaries. You are gaining capillaries and you are gaining mitochondria. The issue is that what is also happening is you're gaining muscle at a rate that is much greater than what the capillaries or mitochondria can develop. So it's basically it's drowning it out, because there's so much more muscle now that you actually thin out the density, you thin out the capillaries and the mitochondria. But if you were to look at the total number of mitochondria, you actually gain them. It's just that they're just shadowed by all the muscle that's gained. So you're not really losing mitochondria, more so as you are gaining. Same thing with body fat percentage. You're not really like, resistance training isn't burning fat any more than endurance. It's just that your body fat percentage is a comparison of how much fat tissue you have compared to how much lean body mass or muscle tissue you have. If you're adding more muscle tissue, you're significantly reducing the relationship between fat and muscle. So your body fat percentage is dropping. So your resistance training athletes, like your sprinters and high intensity, are probably going to be in the single digit percentage, like 5, 6, 7%. Whereas your endurance athletes, your runners, are going to be more in like the 11, 12, 13%. Right. And it's not because they have more fat, it's because they have less muscle, or these guys have bigger muscle. So just as long as you understand that component. But everything improves when you exercise, right? It just, what you use gets better. So if you're using type 1 fibers, your type 1 fibers are going to get better. If you're using type 2, your body's going to have a shift to more type 2 fibers. If you're doing more explosive type training, you're going to become more explosive. So yeah, that type of, if you're doing more endurance, you're going to favor more type 1. You're not going to have that type of aspect. So this should make sense too, right? Pretty straightforward. And that's it. So that's like kind of the review for the exam. Those are the key highlights, and kind of understanding those components. Any questions? Anything you want me to review?